Science is a way of querying nature.
Young people are starting to understand.
There is no planet B.
An upheaval, a massive change is required.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of the Georgia Enviro Show. I am your Enviro host for the week, Ricky LaRue. I am the communications coordinator for the Sierra Club Georgia chapter. The Georgia Enviro Show is a 6-part live stream series which aims to start conversations and highlight environmental issues in Georgia. The show was conceived of and produced by the Dogwood Alliance and their partner organizations, including the Sierra Club Georgia chapter. We are one of the largest environmental organizations in the state, and we are a chapter of the National Sierra Club, which is one of the largest environmental organizations in the world. As a network of activists, partnered organizations, thought leaders, and neighbors, we are seeking social, environmental, and racial justice. And by joining forces and engaging in this fight to develop solutions, we aim to solve the crises faced by our communities, our state, and our planet. So tonight we are going to be talking about our efforts to protect the Okefenokee swamp in South Georgia. Many of you are probably already familiar with this threat that the swamp faces from a mining company. But we're going to run through the basics of what the swamp is all about and the threats that it faces and how the Sierra Club Georgia chapter and our partnered organizations have worked to respond to the threat. So here are the basics. The Okefenokee swamp covers about 438,000 acres in Georgia and Florida, and it receives about 600,000 visitors every year. The National Wildlife Refuge protects more than 407,000 acres of the swamp, so not all of the swamp is federally protected land. And the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge is actually the largest wilderness area east of the Mississippi River. So in terms of economic impact, the refuge sees about $664 million spent every year by visitors. It supports more than 750 local jobs, and it generates more than $5 million in state and local tax revenue. So the threat that the Okefenokee faces comes from a company called Twin Pines Minerals, LLC, which has proposed mining across 900 acres in South Georgia, just outside the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge. The mining would occur in Trail Ridge, which is the eastern boundary of the swamp. We're going to show a map here in a moment that'll make clear where this area is. But what Twin Pines wants to do is mine heavy metals like titanium dioxide, which is commonly used as the pigment in white paint and paper. And to start the mine, it requires a permit from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Now that's going to be important because that's where the Sierra Club and our partnered organizations have tried to apply pressure in terms of public commenting and meeting with officials. So here's the map that I referred to. I'm going to drop out of the screen here to make it a little clearer. So the Okefenokee Wildlife Refuge is there just left of center. It's the light green area. And Trail Ridge is this reddish area just on the east side, on the right side of the Okefenokee swamp and the refuge. You can see that the Okefenokee Refuge and the swamp is connected to the Osceola Wildlife Management Area down in Florida. And you can see that Trail Ridge kind of forms that little tail that is that forms the border between Georgia and Florida. The border is actually formed by the St. Mary's River, but you can see how Trail Ridge kind of protrudes into that. So this is not the first time that we have fought threats to the Okefenokee from mining companies. 20 years ago, actually 21 years ago now, DuPont, the large chemical company and paint company, wanted to mine in the similar for the same materials in a very nearby area. And what the Sierra Club Georgia chapter and our allies were able to do was stop the project entirely. And that took a broad awareness campaign. We engaged with the shareholders of DuPont. We coordinated several different environmental groups together, as well as activists, various stakeholders, politicians, various Native American tribes were involved. And essentially what happened was there was enough public pressure to convince DuPont that this was not worth their time. They backed away from mining entirely. The project led to the largest land donation in Georgia history. 16,000 acres were donated in 2003. 5,000 of those acres went to the National Wildlife Refuge, the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge. And the mineral rights for those 5,000 acres were retired with the Georgia Wildlife Federation. 11,000 acres were donated to the Conservation Fund. So now I just wanted to talk a little bit about what is unique about the geology and the hydrology of the Okefenokee Swamp. So the Okefenokee is a perched wetland. It's about 120 feet above sea level. And so if you can kind of imagine like a saucer filled with water, that's kind of what the Okefenokee Swamp is. And Trail Ridge is about 15 to 20 feet above the surface of the swamp. And it forms a natural barrier or a natural dam that held back receding waters from the ocean about 8,000 years ago and formed the swamp. The swamp is relatively young, but the Trail Ridge itself is millions of years old. And this is what I just said, so we'll move on. So here's how we got to where we are right now in terms of the timeline. Twin Pines filed a permit to mine 12,000 acres in July of 2019, but withdrew that application in February after some public outcry. In March, the company filed for a new application to mine about 900 acres, so they downsized their request. And what they're doing is they're calling this smaller project a demonstration project. Basically, they want to be able to prove that their methodologies will not endanger the swamp, and then will allow them to possibly move on to a much larger footprint. The Corps of Engineers held a public comment period about this new permit, and eventually, due to the COVID-19 pandemic and just the sheer length and complexity of the permit application, they extended the public comment period 6 weeks to May 28th, and they held a virtual public meeting on May the 13th. So the public comment period closed a little bit over a month ago at the end of May, and now we are just waiting for the Corps to make a decision. Now we're going to talk about some of the issues that we have with the mine. Like I said, the swamp, if you can imagine it as a saucer filled with water, we are concerned that mining on Trail Ridge is essentially going to break off a piece of the lip of that saucer that holds back the water. Now, what we're concerned about is if you pull out a bunch of soil and try to put it through a process to extract the minerals that they're looking for and then replace the soil, we're concerned that that's not going to have the same impact of holding back the water that the natural Trail Ridge has for years, thousands of years. So imagine that teacup, that saucer again, and imagine a piece getting broken off the lip. Now, imagine that little piece gets shattered and you try to put it back together. And even if you do the best job imaginable, it's not going to have the same properties as it did before it got broken. On the right side of the screen here, you can kind of see at the top how it's tough to read the small print, but basically the soil profile of Trail Ridge is a lot of different types of soil. There's clay, there's regular soil, there's sands. And so if you pull all of that out and put it into a slurry so that you can extract the minerals that you're looking for and put it back together, and it's all homogeneized, we're concerned that it's not going to have the same effects as it would naturally. We're also concerned about the accountability for damage. Twin Pines is an LLC, a limited liability corporation. That's a strong contrast to what we faced with DuPont. That's a huge multinational corporation. So we're concerned that if something were to happen to the swamp or the mine would have negative impacts, the LLC could fold and declare bankruptcy, and there's little legal recourse. Should this possibility happen, there's little legal recourse we would have to try to recoup any kind of damages, financially, to try to address some of the issues that might get left behind. We're also concerned about wastewater discharge from the mining operation. Like I said, if you pull up all the soil and put it into a slurry, and you're going to use water to try to extract the minerals, where is that water that gets used in the process going to go? The St. Mary's River is nearby, other watersheds are nearby, and we're very concerned about, the wastewater and the impact that'll have in those watersheds. There's also several endangered and threatened species in the area, and our guest later on in this presentation will talk a little bit more about that. There's also noise and light pollution that will come from a mining operation. As far as we know, they plan on operating, if not fully, then nearly 24 hours a day. There's also concern about damage to the local ecotourism business. Like I said at the top, there's more than 750 jobs that the swamp and the refuge supports, from paddling trips to folks who work at nearby state parks and in nearby towns that support the people who come to visit. And if there is a loud and constantly operational mine nearby, we're concerned that might lead to fewer people coming, and that will impact the jobs that the ecotourism supports. Now we're going to talk about the importance of water levels. A water level decrease in the swamp of as little as an inch could have disastrous consequences. So the swamp is is filled with peat, which is highly flammable. They used to use this to burn in lanterns back in the day. And so when the water level gets low and more of that peat is exposed, it increases the threat of wildfires in the area. Some of you might remember that there have been several wildfires in the Okefenokee area. There was one in 2017, 2011, which is in this photo here. And then there was, as recently as 2017, there was another. And the thing to remember about the Okefenokee is that there's such a small difference between the wetlands and the uplands and what's exposed and dry versus what's wet, that even a minor decrease in the water level could have huge consequences. So now we're going to bring on our issue leader, Nancy Daves. Welcome, Nancy. Nancy Daves is a volunteer for the Sierra Club Georgia chapter, and I will give her a chance to sort of describe her background, but some of it's on the screen here. So Nancy, can you tell us a little bit about your career and how you came to be a volunteer for the Sierra Club?
Okay. Well, I worked in business, and this is like my fourth career. So I worked in business, then I worked for an environmental group. My job was to comment on Federal Register notices such as we had for the Okefenokee Swamp under the National Environmental Protection Act. Also other pieces of legislation. I worked with a coalition of groups. I worked for a small environmental group, and having coalitions was really important so that you could divide up the work among the various people who were interested in environmental issues. I used to sue the federal government. I'm not a lawyer, but I make a really good client. I have worked with people, as we do with the Southern Environmental Leadership Center, to keep the government from going off the rails with their responsibilities. I then worked for the government for over 20 years, and I was on the receiving end of these lawsuits, some of which were deserved. So now that I have retired, I retired about 4 years ago and moved from Washington to Atlanta and got very, very active in the local environmental scene. They say think globally and act locally, and that's what I'm doing right now. And Sierra Club and GIPL, Georgia Interfaith Power and Light, are two of the organizations that I work with now. So in terms of the Okefenokee thing, I just basically write up reports about everything that Ricky is doing.
Can you tell us a little bit about the threat that the mining operation would have to threaten an endangered species in the area? I know you have a background at the NOAA fisheries. So could you kind of speak to that a little?
Right. Obviously, the environmental National Environmental Protection Act is an overall piece of legislation that says that the federal government has to look into a lot of different issues. They have to look into water. They have to look in soil preservation. They have to look at endangered and threatened species. So this actually, y'all might be interested in knowing that the Dakota Access Pipeline case that was recently decided on behalf of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe was under the National Environmental Protection Act. And it basically told the company that was doing the pipeline that they had to pay attention and had to do the kind of write-ups and documentation that the act requires. And also there are other pieces of legislation like the Endangered Species Act and the Marine Mammal Protection Act that companies would have to also do deep dives into those things. But NEPA, as we call it, sort of organizes all the work that is necessary for the government to do. We are looking for the Corps of Engineers to do an environmental impact statement that will make sure that they are looking at everything before any mining gets done.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to shift back to the presentation, and so Nancy and I can talk a little bit about our Okefenokee roadshow. So back in February, myself and several Sierra Club volunteers, including Nancy, traveled to the Okefenokee Swamp, and we met with reporters and editors at several different newspapers. So this was actually the first time I'd ever been to the Okefenokee. Nancy, what was your sort of first impression of being there? Or had you been before?
I'd never been before, no. And it was just vast. I remember something that you said reminded me of this. They were doing a controlled burn while we were there. Mm-hmm. And I always think of burns and that kind of thing, firefighting as taking place out west. But they actually, the staff that takes care of the reserve, of the refuge, actually takes care, looks at the water quality, the water height and depth. And if they feel like it's too high, they might do a burn. If they think something's being threatened, they might do a controlled burn. And so obviously the levels of the water and its the relationship to the peat that's there in the swamp are very, very complex. And that's one of the things that we want the mining company to look at before they try to upset the equilibrium of this treasured place.
Yeah, Nancy makes a good point. The Okefenokee is such a delicate ecosystem, and it's so unique. It's like I said, it's it's the largest intact wilderness area east of the Mississippi, and because it's been protected for so long, it's been able to sort of stay in the state that it was in 1,000 years ago. It's been protected, and even small changes to that ecosystem could have huge and unknowable impacts.
And that's the very definition of the mining methods that the Twin Pines plans to use, is to run water, through filtration systems to get out the titanium and other minerals. So it's got everything to do with the levels of water in this swamp.
Mm-hmm. So on our trip down there, we met with editors and reporters at the Florida Times Union in Jacksonville. We met with the editor of the Charlton County Herald, which is right outside of the refuge. We met with people at the Brunswick News, which is just a few miles up the road, and the Savannah Morning News. And sort of our purpose in doing this was just to make sure that the people who are covering these issues and have the ability to help us spread the word about it knew about this, because it was filed with the Army Corps of Engineers, which is not a hugely watched government entity, and we didn't want this to sort of go under the radar. Nancy, how would you describe sort of how some of these people reacted when we went and met with them?
Oh, I thought it was really amusing, because you could tell that a number of them clearly wanted to write something about this and were looking for a reason to write something about this, but just didn't quite have a hook that would be enough for their editor to go along with it. So usually the media can be quite friendly. Especially the Army Corps of Engineers is known in government. My agency never liked them very much because we felt like they weren't very, very open to what they were doing. So I got that impression from the journalists that we met with.
Yeah, I agree completely. And a little bit of my background: before I was with the Sierra Club, I was a reporter and an editor at the Marietta Daily Journal and the Athens Banner Herald. So my background is in journalism, and that was definitely one of the things that we tried to communicate to them was, try to get them a news hook, to give them the runway to write about this. I don't think it's a shock to anyone to hear that smaller outlets are struggling right now. Subscription rates are down, advertising rates are down. And there's only so many journalists that are still working, and they only have so much time in a day. And so, yeah, we tried to just encourage them to realize that this is a big deal, and it's something that people need to know about. And not only do they need to know about, we need to make sure that they know how to tell the Corps of Engineers and the decision makers how they feel about this. Yeah, and so one other thing we did on the trip was we met with folks at the refuge manager, who took us on this little walking trip, and we went up into this watchtower that you see in the photo. And we also met with staff at Representative Buddy Carter's office. He's in Congress and he represents that area. He's a Republican. And we came away from those meetings feeling pretty good about it as well. It didn't seem like Buddy Carter, the impression that we got from his staff was that he wasn't necessarily, ready to make a decision one way or the other, but they definitely listened to our concerns, and he seemed open to hearing from us, which is more than you could say than for some politicians and some elected officials. I want to touch on the coalition that we've been working with. So we're part of a broad coalition of organizations. We have weekly meetings to talk about this. This includes Southern Environmental Law Center, Defenders of Wildlife, the Dogwood Alliance, the Georgia Conservancy, Georgia River Network, 100 Miles, several river keepers and earth keepers, and more. And what we did was we decided to pool our resources and our networks and expertise and our contacts list to make sure that we could maximize our effectiveness. We worked together on messaging. We made sure that like experts at the Southern Environmental Law Center on the legal issues had information available to everyone. Folks like Defenders of Wildlife had information about the threats to endangered and threatened species, and so on and so on. Nancy, can you kind of tell us about your experience working with this coalition? You've been on all these weekly calls as well. I think it's been fantastic.
It has been. And we get really good leadership, mainly from SELC, from the Southern Environmental Leadership Center. But it's very interesting for me as someone new to Georgia. It's been really, really interesting to find out which parts of environmental protection or environmental interests these various groups have. And, you get this feeling sometimes when you go up against the government that, that you're just a small boat, fighting in with high waves. But when you get together in a coalition, you bring everything down to an equal playing field. We have experts in water management. We have experts in endangered species. We have experts in the law. And that is one of the things that I think is interesting about working with a coalition, some of whom are from South Georgia, some are from North Florida, some are from Atlanta. But we've all got an interest in this very, very special place. And a coalition is the way that you bring all of that expertise together to go up against the government.
Yeah, I agree 100%. There are things that we would not have been able to do individually that we were able to do together, like I said, in terms of sharing expertise. And yeah, I think it's made a big difference in terms of our effectiveness. And to that end, together, our coalition helped drive 60,000 comments to the Corps of Engineers about these 2 permit applications from Toned Pines. Now, our position at the Georgia chapter is that, one, the mine shouldn't happen, but bearing that, they should do a full environmental impact statement that must be prepared before any kind of permit is issued. Our online campaign can be found at bit.ly/Okefenokee. That's where we were using that platform to drive comments into the Corps. Obviously, the public comment period is closed now, but that's where we'll be posting updates about this campaign and in our efforts to do it. Nancy, in your experience, can you tell me, put that 6,000 number in context? That feels like a lot to me. That's
enormous. I don't think I ever saw anything. When I was working for the government, I was working on fishery management plans and sometime on wildlife trade applications and things like that. And I don't think I ever saw anything like that. I mean, I was laughing kind of at SELC for making such a big deal about, how many, do we have this many? Do we have that many? And it was like, we always had just a few or a lot. Mm-hmm. And that was about as specific as I ever got in any of my work. So 60,000 is a big number. They know that there's lots of people out there that are going to be watching what they're doing.
So obviously, like that, the number itself may play a role in decision making, and the substance of all the comments will play a role in decision making. But in your experience, how much does a government agency take things like that into account when they're making their decision?
Well, they take it into account a lot because they don't like being sued.
That's a good point.
And when you have the Southern Environmental Leadership Center leading your efforts, I guess that's pretty, lets them know what we're thinking about.
And it lets them know people are paying attention. The Corps of Engineers issues a lot of decisions. They rule on a lot of things, and a lot of them go under the radar. And they know that they're being watched in this case, and people are taking their decisions very seriously.
Yeah, the other thing is that I think that the fact that we've got the people in the coalition are not just environmental groups, but also people that need the refuge for their business. People that are in the tourism industry and depend on the fact that people will come to the Okefenokee swamp for their vacations. That's a broad coalition like that is much, much better than one that's just enviros.
I agree. So,
You're doing great, Ricky.
thanks, Nancy. So I'm just going to make a little pitch here. The Sierra Club Georgia chapter, our mission is to explore, enjoy, and protect our wild places, and everything that comes from that. Environmental justice, racial justice. We have a committee called the Wildlands and Wildlife Committee. It meets every second Monday at 6:30 p.m. If you go to our website, it's on our calendar. It's a digital meeting. It's online. And this is where we talk about issues like the Okefenokee, issues with our national forests, issues with development on Cumberland Island, and all that good stuff. There's a website here to join our Wildlands and Wildlife Committee mailing list. That link is also on our website. And so if you're interested in getting involved with the Sierra Club and getting involved in this type of work, please check us out. That is it for our presentation. Nancy, did you have anything else that we didn't touch on that we should explore a little bit more?
I don't have anything else. We don't have a way to get questions. I suppose that if you could post a question on the Sierra Club's Facebook page or website, we certainly can get back to you. Unless you've got some other way of doing that, Ricky.
Well, I see here that somebody posted, Karen Graney said, can you describe any interest from people outside of Georgia?
Yes, North Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Sierra Club chapters in North Florida and a couple of other smaller environmental groups are very, very concerned about the St. Mary's and all the way that the water travels between Georgia and Florida.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know the specifics, but I remember when we were looking at the public record for the number of public comments, almost every state was represented by at least one comment. So this is the Okefenokee is fairly well known. There was a comic strip featuring a character called Pogo that was based in the Okefenokee. It ran syndicated in newspapers, all over the country. And that comic strip actually played a role in defeating DuPont 20 years ago. And yeah, the Okefenokee is not only is it a unique place, it's a unique name, and so it's fairly well known, and people are, it's one of the 7 natural wonders of Georgia. It's getting some interest.
Oh, you know something? Another one of our coalition partners should have mentioned it. Are some of the tribes from Georgia and North Florida, which was great to have them involved with us. I think Department of Interior tends to take their concerns into account very much. Yeah,
absolutely. As many different points of view that we can get to weigh in, I think the better, and takes our concerns more seriously. If it's not just environmental groups, it's a pretty broad coalition. Okay, well, we want to thank you everyone for joining us here tonight. Thank you to the Dogwood Alliance for helping put this on and for producing the show. And thank you to all the volunteers who helped put it together. Thank you very much to Nancy for agreeing to be our guest. I want to ask you to be sure to tune in next week for episode 3 of the Georgia Enviro Show. It'll be next Wednesday, July 15th at 5:30. It will be hosted by the Center for Sustainable Coast, and it will cover their special guest's current work on rooftop solar installations. Sierra Club's also involved in coastal issues and rooftop solar. So thanks again, everyone, for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Take care. Be safe.
Bye.